Hi, I'm Dave Wurzel, and you're watching PHTV4 Spotlight. Today's Spotlight is a police update, and specifically we're going to talk about the CIT, or the Crisis Intervention Team. And today with me to take a look at this topic is Police Officer Joe Carlson, Palos Heights Police Department. Thank you for being here.
Hi, thank you for having me, Dave.
You know, this is a topic I'm really interested in, partly because it has there's such a need for, I think, the CIT, but like perceptually that's what it looks like to me. But also, it's, I don't know if new or relatively new presence in how certain situations are handled. You know, maybe new several years, but not the traditional model. So we're going to talk about the Crisis Intervention Team, what they do, you know, how that organization works or how that team works. Before we do that, though, can you give us your background as a police officer and your career path here?
Sure. So I've been a police officer for 20 years. I've been with the city of Palos Heights for 17 some change. And my career path, I've done a number of different things for the department. However, this is something that I feel very strongly about. What I noticed over the years was an increased call for service where it wasn't necessarily a criminal act. It was rooted more in mental health related issues, behavioral health related issues, substance use, that sort of thing. So I realized we needed to have kind of a shift in how we're addressing this.
I feel like that, you know, the public perception I have, and I'm speaking really just for myself, but I feel like I've noticed that more in the news lately, that, you know, the awareness that people or police sometimes are being called into situations, to use your language, where it wasn't really a criminal act, but people didn't know who to contact, so they called the police department. Mm-hmm. And maybe even in some cases, police officers were being called into a situation where they didn't have the specific training or background to handle that certain type of problem, right? So, and if I, you know, fix any part of what I'm saying, what is the CIT and what are they in Palos Heights? And I know it's a bigger organization like that. Like there are CIT teams everywhere, I'm assuming.
Yeah. So CIT stands for Crisis Intervention Team. And there's a number of layers to it, just as you said. So the model itself was created back in the 1980s through the city of Memphis. And what they realized was police departments needed a little bit different approach than solely we're going to deal with a singular criminal act and take someone to jail. From there, that movement spread. Now, CIT, a formalized training, has actually been in Illinois since 2004. And what it works to do is it works on de-escalation. It works on recognizing signs and symptoms of mental health, behavioral health related issues. And then what we do here, we take that a step further than just the training. We actually work to recognize what's going on and then align people with area social services to actually give them the support that they need. Because when people call 911, they just don't know what to do. Mm-hmm. We're open 24 hours a day and we're a free service. So everyone says, you know, I'm just going to call 911 because I'm out of options. I just don't know. And that's fine. However, when we would respond, it helps us recognize what is the root issue of the reason for the call for service. And if we can get people in touch with area supports, then ideally there is no more disturbance in the future for anyone, either the caller, the family, the person.
Hey, and as you're saying something, also police officers aren't being taken away from something where they might have to address criminal behavior. Mm-hmm. But before I get into that, and I do want to talk about the situations where people would contact the Crisis Intervention Team. How is it staffed in like our department? And I'm assuming that's a specialized training program that you go through, right?
Yes.
Can you talk about that training and how big is our CIT staff in Palos Heights?
Sure. So it's a 40-hour program put on through the Illinois Training and Standards Board. And we have 5 officers currently on our team. Some of our officers have a background in additional mental health training before they came to our department, and other officers are put through training once they're here. Now, I also have additional training in the fact that I actually went to get my master's in social work. So that provides me a little bit more in-depth knowledge than simply the 40-hour class. And I also think that helps us align people with different aspects of things that they need. So in the social work world, there's a thing called biopsychosocial. Essentially, that's everything that touches a person ends up involving their life outcomes or life challenges. So if we can address several different aspects of things affecting them at the same time, that's how we put them on a better path than they may be on currently.
Just out of curiosity, I don't know that you'd have this, are CI teams, is this common everywhere? Like, do surrounding communities have CIT teams?
It's becoming more common. So I would say that the north and western suburbs, it's pretty common. The south suburbs here were a little bit slower to bring this on than other areas of Chicagoland, but they are up and coming.
And then, all right, so you started to talk about it, and now I'd like to maybe if we can look at the specifics, the types of calls you get, the types of situations you're called into. I'm imagining a phone call comes in maybe to 911, maybe to the police department where they need help, and they're like, no, this sounds like a CIT type situation instead. And so somebody else gets contacted or brought in. How many calls do you go on? How common a situation is this? And then what does that look like? You know, no, this is a CIT thing.
Sure. Well, a couple different things. How common is it? So last year we worked with approximately 160 different families. You know, that's a pretty large number.
Yeah.
And 2/3 of them actually reside or work in the city of Palos Heights. The other 1/3 does not. They're people that are traveling through and maybe happen to, somebody calls because there's a verbal domestic at like cell phone store or something like that, right? So the way that we determine if it's a CIT related call, generally the 911 call comes in. That's probably 95% of our initial calls. And all I do is I ask our officers just to handle the call however you need to handle it from a criminal standpoint. But ask yourself, is there a root issue? And if we have a CIT officer on duty, which now that there's 5 of us, usually there's always one working, but not all the time, call over a CIT officer. So you're going to handle whether or not there's a criminal aspect, yes, no. And then the CIT officer is going to ask, is there a support aspect? Now, if there's no CIT officer that can go to the call, we ask the patrol officers that handle the call to forward that information to our CIT team, at which point we will take a look at it and we will speak with the people involved to try and get to a root issue. So for example, let's say cell phone store verbal domestic, just simple example, okay? The officers get there, it turns out the issue is new cell phone plan, might be added money they weren't planning on. They have small children that they're having trouble, you know, providing food for. And in addition to the fact that they need this for their job, but then their job is a certain amount of miles away. So there's a lot of stuff, right? As we go back to that biopsychosocial model or aspect, there's a lot of moving parts in everyone's life. So what we do is we work with about 80 different social service agencies, and we attempt to compartmentalize these issues. And then we reach out and speak with people and put them in touch with, okay, this group might be able to help you with this issue. This group might be able to help you with this issue, and so on.
I was going to say, as I'm listening to you talk about that, my question was going to be, is there a follow-up? Because when you talk about these types of problems, these aren't one-off things where you like solving the instant and everybody goes their happy way and everything's, you hope you step in that direction. So that would be my question about like, well, what's the follow-up support structure around this? And it sounds like those pieces are in place.
Yes. So when you say it's not a one-stop, sometimes it actually is. Because oftentimes, people are, you know, for lack of better terming, they're just kind of fed up with their current situation, but they also get overwhelmed. So they recognize something's not right. But now they have to cross a bridge and say, okay, what is not right? And they need to put it in terms that is searchable online. And then once they do that, then it comes up with a whole bunch of stuff. How many times have you tried to Google something and you come up with 3 million things?
Right.
Where do you begin? So what we try and do is we help narrow down what it is that's affecting you or your family, your loved one, and then we give you a starting point. You choose to work with that group or not, no problem. Obviously, it's your life. You choose what you want. It has absolutely no bearing on anything with the police department. But what we've found is most people just need to start that heading towards a direction. And many people can actually continue on for themselves. Now, in terms of follow-up, we do a number of things. So we have a group called Trinity Services, which we can get into that in a minute. They will provide follow-ups if we request it. So many times we will request follow-ups, which would be independent from the police department. Secondly, we also conduct follow-ups. We either do that through email or phone call, just check-ins. Hey, how's things going? And people can choose to speak with us or choose not to.
I would think people really appreciate that, right? They know somebody out there cares and they're checking to make sure they're okay.
They do, yes, yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned Trinity Services. It sounds like there's a couple things going on here. Something happens, CIT gets involved, maybe it's handled right there and things are good, or maybe this is a little bit more involved. They get other services, or the Palos Heights CIT team is following up. Trinity Services, what does that look like, and what, can you give us a sample of the type of services we're talking about?
Sure. So Trinity is it's a pretty large organization, and they have a couple different aspects that touch our CIT team. So one aspect is this thing called the living room. The living room is a drop-in center that's located in Orland Park, and it's open 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. The purpose of the living room is for somebody to go when they're just not having a good day, they need to speak with somebody, maybe they can't get into their counselor or therapist, all those sorts of things, because, people are booked up now, right? 8 months.
Things happen, and you don't necessarily have it scheduled.
They do. It's scheduled, and then it can be difficult to get a hold of somebody. Or maybe you were working with somebody 3 years ago and things were fine, so you haven't gone back, but now all of a sudden something happens. So the living room is a place where people could go just to walk in. You could sit down with a professional. So that is a huge, huge help. Secondly, what Trinity Services does for our crisis intervention team, we work with them on what's called a co-responder program. So the co-response program is a CIT officer is either virtually, or we can now bring them with us in person, paired with a mental health professional who will actually go with us on CIT calls for service. And they will help work with the person on site, so we don't even have to take them from their home. Many times we have opportunities where we're at a point where does somebody need to go to the hospital or do they not? And the old model is you err on the side of caution, you bring them to the hospital, but it's been shown that that's not always the best choice, especially if something outpatient or more on their own is going to be a better path. So what this allows us to do is it allows us to bring in a mental health professional and work with the person on their couch and help make that determination of, are we okay with them choosing their path and not having to go to the hospital? And that helps out everybody.
Can you give some examples of the types of calls so that people have a sense of, I think the distinction between a criminal act and non-criminal is probably pretty clear, I'm hoping, but what types of calls or situations is our CIT team called into, most typically?
People are people. I'm not sure there is a most typical, So I'll give you some examples. So the verbal domestic. Okay, it's called because people in the area are concerned about this maybe spiraling into something physical, and then the officers determine what the root source of the argument was initially, and then we work to resolve that.
So nothing criminal has happened yet.
Sometimes criminal things happen. So, for example, let's say we have a person who got arrested for a DUI. Okay, let's say a really high number, and the criminal course is going to follow whatever the criminal course does. However, our crisis intervention officers, we'll speak with the person if they choose to speak with us. It has no bearing on whatever happens, but if you were considering maybe today did not serve you, there is groups out there who might be able to help you, okay? So again, has no bearing on your criminal case. Whatever's happened criminally is handled separately, and this might be an avenue for change. So that would be an example of it was criminal, but our CIT aspect looks at something different.
Right. And that makes perfect sense. The criminal thing still took place, But the person still has another problem that needs to get dealt with.
Exactly, exactly. And if we're trying to limit recidivism, if we're trying to actually look at criminal justice reform, in my opinion, criminal justice reform isn't necessarily about changing outcomes from the criminal case. It's trying to make sure that the person's not put in additional criminal cases. So we're trying to resolve root issues that even put them in this situation to begin with. And the other thing too, especially when there's a victim of a crime, we don't look at what about these victims that potentially don't have to be victimized. So every time that our team works with somebody and they pick a better path for themselves, we actually have no idea the amount of people that we're positively affecting, because they may never become victims of anything.
Right.
Because this person has chosen different aspects, different ways to go.
I was going to say that there's a ripple effect here. The impact that the CI team has, I mean, it's almost beyond like that immediate moment. It's a much bigger thing. Any other types of calls you want to mention, or situations you've had to deal with? Another sample of. So you mentioned potentially like a verbal domestic concern. Drinking, driving thing could still be part of it. Other types of calls you've been on?
Well, I mean, we have suicidal ideology calls. Somebody calls and says, I feel like, you know, today's the day I might consider taking my life. You know, that we have to navigate as to the immediacy, do they have a plan, that sort of thing. That's certainly not criminal to do that. People call the police for a myriad of reasons, you know. Retail theft, what is the root issue for the reason why you're stealing whatever you're stealing today? Is it to support a substance use habit? Is it because you truly need food and shelter? You know, like what is that?
Yeah.
You know.
So again, that's probably another example where there's a criminal component, but there's also a need for the CIT team on the other side of that. So we're kind of into this topic, and this is something we were talking about beforehand. I didn't hear about this till you mentioned it, you know, when we were talking about the issues for this interview. 911, we talked about people call 911 or they call the police department. We've got a problem, there's a situation. There's another number out there that might be more on target or more applicable to certain situations. Can you talk about that number?
Yes, definitely. So there's a federal program called 988. So the purpose of 988, it's a 24-hour, what they call warm line. So if you or your loved one, you're feeling things aren't going well, you need some social services support, maybe you have angst, anxiety, some form of depression, a lot of things going on, but it's not immediate, okay? Like you haven't done something to immediately possibly end your life, but you need supports. You can call 988. And what's going to happen is you're going to speak with a trained counselor over the phone to kind of work through whatever you or your loved one have going on. And then what they're supposed to do is put you in touch with area agencies, very similar to what we would do, to try and help you with that. Now, what's really cool about this is, again, through this federal government program, what can happen is if you say, hey, look, I want to actually speak with a counselor in my home, like over the phone, like I get it, it's good, but like I need a little bit more, they have the ability to send someone to your home, and they do.
So this is so federally funded. Now I'm thinking this is a big, so there's probably like a regional call center, I'm guessing, or something like that.
There is.
But there's access or availability for local specific, like, no, I live in Palos Heights, or I live, you know.
Yeah, exactly. So what ends up happening, if you were to call 988, the regional call center comes out of Central Illinois. However, if you wanted to speak with somebody in person, come to your home, that actually gets deferred to Trinity Services, and they have several local hubs. The hub that would service this area would be in the Homewood-Flossmoor area, and they would be able to come and respond to your home.
Okay. All right, so that's a good transition, the next part of this. So how does, like, let's say somebody says, I don't need the police, this isn't a home break-in, or there's not a violence thing, but there's a problem.
Sure.
Right? How do they contact CIT? Like, they know that's the route they want to go, or they need help that way. What is it?
Yeah. So a couple things. They could either just call the station, so that's 708-448-5060, and we'll put the number up on the bottom of the screen here. They could call 911 and just say, hey, look, it's not necessarily an emergency, but is there a CIT officer working? I would like to speak with that person. That's 100% fine too. They could also, just drop by the station as well, whatever they would prefer.
Okay. All right. So there's a variety of ways to make that contact and to get to it. And obviously asking for a CIT team member, fast tracks that, I guess, a little bit, right? Any other advice or tips you'd give people considering this, or they should know about the CIT team?
Well, the only advice, as we look at mental health related issues, very often people let things go until they just can't deal with them anymore. So my advice would be prevention is the best medicine. Now, prevention, in my opinion, is not waiting until a precipitating incident that either would cause somebody to become alarmed, maybe around you, and call the police. Maybe something in your own home has finally gotten to a tipping point. If something is headed towards a direction that you don't feel it should be going, but you're not quite sure what to do about it, feel free to stop in or talk with one of us, because there may be ways to help set you and your family or your loved one on a different path. If they choose to accept it, if it works for you, this is 100% up to the families. This is up to the person calling. This is up to the person to decide whether or not change is for them. Because this isn't a criminal matter. What we try and do is put you in touch with people that might be able to change the course you're on. So if you feel like things aren't going well, there's probably a reason why you feel that way, because they may not be going well. And we might be able to help you out and put you in a different trajectory.
I would think that's especially the case. When something, if you're having problems at home or at work or with family members or whatever, I think you kind of feel it before, in a lot of cases, maybe not always, but before it gets to that point.
Yes.
I think the possibility also, to me it sounds like a great organization, a great service that the community is providing in the Palos Heights and other areas, that I can call, and you'll help get me into a direction or a person or a contact that will help me manage these things, better.
Yes. Yeah. And I would say this too. Everybody on the team understands the drive for being on the team. This is not some sort of mechanism to sneak you into a criminal case. That's not at all what we attempt to do. And I'm mentioning that because sometimes there is that feedback. Like, well, I was reluctant to come to the police department, and I understand that and I appreciate that. But just so everybody knows, this is not an attempt to build a case on someone at all. In fact, it is quite the opposite. It's to try and work with whomever chooses to speak with us about how best to positively affect your life, and then help you with that change if you would want to do it.
Well, thank you very much. I understand that service sounds so critical, and I like the preventative component to it. Hopefully avoid the problem that's going to come, or avoid problems later on.
Exactly. Get
the person on the right path. Use your word. Yeah, no, that's a great descriptor for it. Officer Carlson, thank you very much for coming in. Thank you for sharing the information on the crisis intervention team.
Great. Thank you for having me.
I'm Dave Wurzel, and you've been watching PHTV4 Spotlight. Today's Spotlight has been about the crisis intervention team, and we've been talking with Police Officer Joe Carlson of Palos Heights. Thank you for watching.